Mother spent 45 minutes at her 70th birthday dinner, thanking the daughter who had stolen $11,000 from her. And she did it while looking straight past me, the daughter who'd been paying her mortgage in secret for 2 years. The restaurant was the kind of place my mother loved and could never have afforded on her own. White tablecloths, a sommelier who pretended not to notice nobody at the table knew anything about wine. A private room she'd booked because she said a milestone like this deserved an audience. There were maybe 30 people. Aunts, a couple of cousins, the women from her old church, 2 of her bridge friends, my stepfather, and my younger sister Brielle, who sat at our mother's right hand the way she always did, glowing like she'd done something to earn it. I'm Camille. I was 31 that night, sitting at the far end of the table next to my husband Theo, close enough to hear every word and far enough that nobody expected me to say any of them. I'd worn the navy dress I say for occasions where I need to feel like I'm holding something together. My hands were folded in my lap. Under the table, Theo's knee was pressed against mine, which was his way of telling me he was there, and also his way of telling me to breathe. My mother stood up with her glass. She's good at this part. She's always been good at the part where everyone looks at her. She talked about the long road, the hard years after my father left when Brielle and I were small, the sacrifices she made. And then she turned, with her eyes wet and shining, toward my sister. And she said that through all of it, there had been one person who never let her down, one daughter who showed up. One daughter who, even now, drove her to her doctor's appointments and helped her with the bills and never once made her feel like a burden. She lifted her glass to Brielle. I want to tell you, I sat there calmly. I didn't. I felt my face go hot in that specific way it does, right before I cry. And I hated it, because I wasn't sad. I was something else. I had been driving my mother to her cardiology appointments. I had set up the autopay that kept her from losing the house in the spring of the year before, when her property taxes came due and there was nothing in her checking account but $40 and a return payment fee. I had done it quietly, through an arrangement she didn't fully understand, because by then I'd already learned that anything I did out loud got reassigned in the family story to somebody else. But I'm getting ahead of myself because the part that matters isn't the speech. The speech was just the night the floor finally gave out onto something that had been rotting for a long time. Let me go back. The favoritism wasn't new. I could give you the whole catalog. The way Brielle got a car at 16, while I was told that taking the bus would build character, the way her college was paid for out of an account that had supposedly been split evenly between us, except mine never seemed to have anything in it when the tuition bills came. I worked 2 jobs through school and graduated with loans I'm still paying on at 33. Brielle graduated debt-free and announced she wanted to find herself, which she's been doing expensively ever since. None of that is the point exactly, but it's the soil. Everything else grew out of. I'd made my peace with being the less loved one. You can make peace with almost anything if you're given enough years to practice. What I had not made peace with, what I didn't even know about, was what had been happening to my mother's money. It started 2.5 years ago on a Tuesday with a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman named Renee from my mother's bank, and she was calling because she was, in her words, a little worried. My mother had come in trying to withdraw cash against a line of credit she didn't seem to understand she had, and when Renee asked her a few gentle questions, my mother had gotten confused and given Renee my number as her emergency contact. I didn't even know I was her emergency contact. That alone should have told me something, that some part of my mother, underneath everything, knew which daughter to call when the ground actually shook. I drove over that afternoon. My mother was flustered and defensive in the way she gets when she's scared, which looks exactly like the way she gets when she's angry. She told me it was nothing, a mix-up, the bank being difficult. She told me Brielle was handling her finances now, and I shouldn't worry about it. I should have pushed harder right then. I didn't because pushing my mother has never gotten me anything but a door in my face. And I was tired, and I told myself that if Brielle was handling it, then at least it was being handled. It was being handled. It was being handled straight into the ground. I want to be fair, even now. For a while, I genuinely thought my sister was just bad at it. Brielle has never been organized. She loses her own keys twice a week. So when I started noticing things, a late notice on the kitchen counter when I came by to drop off groceries, A utility shut-off warning my mother tried to hide under a magazine. I assumed it was carelessness. I offered to help. Brielle told me sweetly that she had it under control, that Mom got anxious when too many people were in her business, that the best thing I could do was stay in my lane. And my mother backed her up, so I backed off. Again. The thing that finally cracked it open was the mortgage. My mother has lived in the same house since 1989. It's a modest place, a 3-bedroom ranch on a street where everyone's lawn looks roughly the same. The house was paid off years ago. I remember the little party she threw when she made the last payment, how proud she was. So when I was over there one evening, helping her sort through a drawer of mail she'd let pile up, and I found a mortgage statement, I genuinely thought it was a scam. A house she'd owned free and clear, with a balance of $68,000 on it, and a payment that was 2 months past due. I asked her about it. She got that scared, angry look. She said Brielle had explained all this, that it was a reverse mortgage, that it was a smart thing financial advisors recommend for seniors, that it let her access the value of her home. Except it wasn't a reverse mortgage. It was a home equity loan, taken out 18 months earlier. And the money, $68,000 of my mother's house, was simply gone. I didn't say anything that night. I want you to understand that I'd learned by then that the moment I reacted, the story would flip. I'd become the hysterical one, the dramatic one, the daughter who was always trying to start something. So I sat with my mother and I helped her sort her mail and I told her I loved her and I drove home and I told Theo and then I started keeping records. Theo's the one who taught me to keep records. He works in insurance, in claims, and he has a deep and unromantic faith in documentation. He told me that if I thought something was wrong, I needed to stop arguing about feelings and start collecting facts. So that's what I did. Over the next several months, I became a quiet, careful person I didn't entirely recognize. I got my mother to add me to her bank account. This took a while and a fair amount of patience, because Brielle had spent a long time convincing our mother that I was after her money, which, looking back, is the kind of thing you accuse someone of when it's the exact thing you're doing yourself. But there was a window. Brielle went to Tulum for 10 days with a man she'd met online, and while she was gone, I took my mother to the bank, told the truth gently, and got myself added as a joint signer on the checking account, not to take anything, just to see. What I saw, once I could see it, took my breath away. For 2 years, money had been moving out of my mother's accounts in a steady, patient drip. Not dramatic withdrawals. Brielle was smarter than that, or at least more careful. It was transfers to an account I didn't recognize at first until I matched the last 4 digits to a deposit slip I found in Brielle's car when I borrowed it. It was charges at stores my mother never shopped at. It was a recurring payment to a property management company in a town 2 hours away, which turned out to be the rent on an apartment Brielle had been living in that my mother had been paying for while telling everyone Brielle was nobly staying close to home to take care of her. The home equity loan I'd found was just the headline. The body of the story was much longer. There was the $11,000 Brielle had moved out the same month my mother's property taxes went unpaid, the month I quietly set up the auto-pay that saved the house, never knowing that the reason the well had run dry was that my sister had drained it. There were the small things too, which somehow hurt more. A charge at a nail salon, a streaming subscription, a tab at a wine bar, my mother eating cereal for dinner so my sister could get her gels done. I built a folder. Theo helped me organize it the way he organizes a claim. Chronologically, every charge cross-referenced, every transfer documented with screenshots and downloaded statements. I matched the mysterious account to my sister. I found the loan paperwork and saw on the signature line my mother's name in handwriting that started out as hers and got shakier and less certain near the end, the way it does now, and next to it a notary stamp from a notary who, I later learned, was a friend of Brielle's boyfriend. I'm not going to pretend I felt powerful, holding all of this. I felt sick. There were nights I sat in my car in my mother's driveway with a folder on the passenger seat and just cried, because I wanted so badly for it not to be true, and because some small, ugly part of me kept whispering that if I exposed it, I'd finally be the villain my mother had always quietly suspected I was, the good daughter destroying the family. That's the trap, you see. They count on you loving them too much to tell the truth. If you're still with me, and if any part of this is hitting close to home, I'd really appreciate it if you'd let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps more than you know to feel like I'm not telling this to an empty room. The question I kept circling, the one that kept me up at night, was the same one you're probably asking right now. Why didn't I just go straight to my mother? Sit her down, lay out the folder, show her the proof? I tried. I need you to know I tried. I asked her to lunch, just the two of us, and I brought a softened version of it. Not the folder, just a few statements. A couple of the transfers, framed as gently as I could manage. I told her I was worried. I told her I thought someone might be taking advantage of her. I didn't even say Brielle's name. And my mother looked at the papers for about 4 seconds, and then she looked at me, and her face closed like a storm shutter, and she said, "Your sister warned me you'd do this." She said Brielle had told her I'd come around eventually with some story, trying to turn her against the one child who'd stayed. She said she knew I'd always been jealous. She put the statements face down on the table like they were something obscene, and she asked me, with real hurt in her voice, why I couldn't just be happy for once. I drove home that day so angry I had to pull over. Not at my mother, at the situation, because I understood finally what I was up against. Brielle hadn't just stolen money, she'd spent 2 years building a wall inside our mother's head, brick by brick, a wall with my name written all over it. Every time my mother got a strange feeling, every time something didn't add up, Brielle had been there first, ready with the explanation, "It's Camille. She's jealous. She's after your money. Don't trust her." By the time I came with the truth itself sounded like the thing I'd been warned about, so I couldn't just go to my mother. I tried the front door and it was nailed shut from the inside. That's the part the people who say, "Why didn't you just talk to her?" don't understand. There are families where the truth is a key, and there are families where someone has already changed all the locks. I needed witnesses. I needed it to come from somewhere other than my mouth, because my mouth had been poisoned for me in advance. And I needed to be careful because the one thing worse than my mother not believing me would be my mother believing me too late, after the house was gone and the accounts were empty and Brielle had moved on to whatever was next. I started quietly with my Aunt Doreen, my mother's younger sister, the one person in that generation who'd always had a soft spot for me. I didn't dump everything on her. I just asked her one afternoon over coffee whether she'd noticed Mom seeming stressed about money, and Doreen's face did something complicated, and she said slowly that she'd lent my mother $300 in February and had never been paid back, which wasn't like her sister at all, and that she'd been afraid to ask about it. That was my opening. I showed her a little. Not all of it, just enough that her hand went to her mouth. Doreen brought in my cousin Wendell, who's a paralegal, and Wendell looked at the loan documents and got very quiet and then very precise. He was the one who used words I'd been afraid to use myself. Forged signature. Financial exploitation of an elder. He told me that what my sister had done wasn't just cruel, it was criminal, and that there were laws specifically written for exactly this. Because apparently I was not the first person in the history of the world to have a sibling do this to a parent. There was a strange comfort in that. Awful, but a comfort. Theo's older brother, Marcus, no, I'm not going to use that name. The man's name is Desmond. Theo's older brother, Desmond, works in fraud investigation for a regional bank. And he walked me through how to request the full transaction history and how to flag the account for review. He's the one who found the apartment payments. He's the one who matched the notary. By the time we were done, the folder wasn't a folder anymore. It was a binder. I made a decision I still think about. I decided not to ambush my mother. I love her. Even now, after everything, I love her. And I wasn't going to humiliate her in front of a room full of people, no matter how much a small wounded part of me wanted to. The birthday dinner was Brielle's stage. I wasn't going to make it mime. But I also wasn't going to sit at that dinner and let my mother toast a thief and call her the daughter who showed up. So this is what I actually did, and it's quieter than you might want, and it's the part I'm proudest of. The week before the birthday, I went to Adult Protective Services, not to punish my mother, to protect her. I sat in a small office, and I gave a caseworker named Priscilla. I'll just call her the caseworker, the binder, and I told her everything. And she listened with the calm of someone who has heard this exact story 100 times and is still, somehow, furious about it every time. She told me they would open an investigation. She told me the bank, once formally notified of suspected elder fraud, would be required to act. And she told me something I held on to, that the goal was never to take my mother's choices away, but to make sure the choices she was making were actually hers. Then I went to Wendell and we filed a report with the police, with the forged loan documents attached, because a forged signature on a $68,000 lien is not a family disagreement. It's a felony. And then I went to the birthday dinner. I sat at the far end of the table in my navy dress, and I watched my mother raise her glass to my sister, and I let her. I let the whole speech happen, Theo's knee against mine. I clapped when everyone clapped. Brielle caught my eye across the table and gave me a little smile. The one that says, I won, and you'll never be able to do anything about it. And I smiled back, and for the first time in my life, that smile cost me nothing, because I knew what was already in motion underneath the tablecloth. I'd love it if you'd hit that subscribe button before I tell you how it ended. It would mean the world. There's more, and the more is the part I never saw coming. The investigation moved faster than I expected. 11 days after the birthday, the bank froze the whole equity line and flagged every transaction connected to the unfamiliar account. Brielle got a call from a fraud investigator. Desmond warned me it would happen, though he was scrupulously not involved in our mother's case, ethics being ethics. And Brielle, panicking, did the single most Brielle thing she could have done. She called our mother, crying, and told her that I had stolen her identity and was framing her, and that Mom needed to call the bank and tell them it was all a misunderstanding before I ruined an innocent person's life. And here is the part I never saw coming. Here is the part that, when I think about it, still makes my throat tight. My mother called the bank, but she didn't say what Brielle told her to say. What I learned later, from the caseworker, and then from my mother herself in pieces over months, was that the bank's fraud line had also been calling my mother, doing exactly what they're supposed to do when an account gets flagged for elder exploitation. A patient woman had been walking my mother through her own statements, line by line, asking simple questions. Did you authorize this transfer? Did you open this loan? Did you sign this document? And my mother, who had spent 2 years being told by my sister that everything was fine, that I was the danger, that she didn't need to look too closely. My mother, alone in her kitchen with a stranger's calm voice on the phone, finally looked. She told me later that the moment it broke was the apartment, the rent. 2 years of payments to a town she'd never been to, for an apartment she didn't know existed. She said she'd held the phone and she'd thought very clearly who lives there. And she already knew, she'd known, she said in some buried way, for a long time. She just hadn't been able to afford to know it, because knowing it meant that the daughter she'd built her whole identity around had been robbing her blind, and that the daughter she'd spent years pushing away had been telling the truth. My mother did not, I want to be honest, immediately fall to her knees and apologize. That's not how it went. It went messy and slow and human. There was a terrible phase where she was angry at me anyway, irrationally, because I was the one who'd known, and being known by me felt like a humiliation. There was a phase where she tried to protect Brielle even then, where she begged the caseworker to make it go away, where she talked about not wanting to send her own child to prison. I understood that, even though it gutted me. You don't stop being a mother just because your child is a thief. But the facts were the facts, and the facts were no longer only in my mouth. They were in a bank's records and a notary's logs and a police report. The forged signature was the thing that couldn't be loved away. Brielle was charged with financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult and with forgery. Her boyfriend's friend, the notary, lost his commission and got charged too. The case is still working its way through the system as I'm telling you this, slowly, the way these things do. The money is a harder story. Most of it is gone, spent on apartments and trips, and a lifestyle that vanished the second the spending stopped. But the house was saved. The bank, once it understood the loan had been obtained through forgery, worked with us, and between the legal pressure and a settlement and what restitution the court ordered, the lien came off the title. My mother owns her home again, free and clear, the way she did the day she threw that little party in 1989. I cried when the new title came in the mail. So did she. Brielle and I do not speak. I don't know that we ever will. The last thing she said to me in the parking lot outside a courthouse was that I destroyed the family. I used to lie awake, terrified of exactly that sentence. The good daughter. The destroyer. But standing there in that parking lot, I realized I didn't believe it anymore. I didn't destroy anything. I refused to keep pretending a fire was a fireplace. There's a difference, and it took me 31 years and a binder full of bank statements to learn it. My mother and I are still finding our way to each other. It's not a movie. She doesn't say everything I'd want her to say, but she calls me now, not as an emergency contact, not when the ground shakes, but on ordinary Tuesdays, just to talk. Last month, she said, out of nowhere, in the middle of a conversation about absolutely nothing, that she'd had 2 daughters her whole life and had only ever managed to see one of them, and she was sorry it had taken almost losing everything for her to look at the other one. I didn't say much back. I didn't trust my voice. I just told her I was glad she could see me now, and I meant it. Here's the thing, nobody tells you about being the unfavored child. You spend your whole life believing that if you just love them quietly enough, carefully enough, you'll eventually be chosen. And the cruel joke is that the quiet, careful love is exactly what makes you invisible. They never had to fight for you, so they never learned your worth. I stopped being invisible the day I stopped being quiet. Not loud, not cruel, just honest, with a binder and a caseworker and the patience to let the truth come from somewhere they couldn't poison first. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this. If something in your gut is telling you that something is wrong with someone you love's money, with their safety, with the version of reality the favored sibling keeps insisting on, write it down. Keep the records. Find the people who will listen. You are not the villain for refusing to look away. You are the only one who looked. My mother's 71 now. We're throwing her a small party next month. Just family, the real kind, in the house that's hers again. There won't be a private room or a sommelier or a long speech. There'll be a sheet cake from the grocery store, the kind she actually likes, and I'll be sitting right next to her this time. Not at the far end of the table. Close enough to be seen. For a long time, I believed that the quietest person in the room was the safest one. I thought if I never made a sound, if I just kept loving my mother carefully and asking for nothing, the danger would pass me by. What I learned instead was that silence is not the same as safety. My silence is exactly what gave Brielle the room to work. Every year I swallowed the unfairness. Every time I told myself to stay in my lane, I was handing my sister another brick to build that wall inside our mother's head. Causes have effects. The 2 years I spent keeping the peace were the same 2 years the money drained out dollar by dollar into an apartment 2 hours away. I didn't cause the theft, but my quiet absolutely made it easier. The thing that finally changed everything wasn't anger and it wasn't love either, not by itself. It was choosing to be honest even when honesty made me look like the villain my mother had been warned about. There's a kind of courage that doesn't look like courage at all from the outside. It looks like a woman sitting in her car in a driveway with a binder of bank statements crying and then going inside anyway. It looks like keeping a record when keeping a record feels like betrayal. I want anyone watching to understand that doing the right thing rarely feels heroic in the moment. It mostly feels lonely. And being right was never going to be enough on its own. If I'd marched into that birthday dinner and screamed the truth, I'd have lost. Brielle had already poisoned the well. My word alone was worthless. What worked was thinking it through clearly and patiently, adding myself to the account during the 10 days Brielle was away, matching the account number to a deposit slip, going to the caseworker, to Wendell, to the police, building it so the truth came from somewhere my mother couldn't dismiss as jealousy. The smartest thing I ever did was refuse to let the truth come only from my mouth. But clear thinking and good intentions still would have died on the vine without the stubbornness to see it through. Months of documentation, conversation after conversation with people who half believed Brielle's version, the temptation almost daily to drop the whole thing and go back to being invisible because invisible at least didn't hurt this much. I kept going. Not loudly, just steadily. If your gut is telling you something is wrong with someone you love's money or safety, and everyone keeps insisting you're imagining it, please don't talk yourself out of it. Write it down. Find the people who will actually listen. You are not destroying your family by refusing to pretend. You might be the only one with your eyes open. I almost stayed quiet forever, and it would have cost my mother her home and cost me the chance finally to be seen. Speak carefully, speak truthfully, and speak before it's too late.